The Age of Innocence. My mother was 42 years old when I was born, the last of her 3 kids. My mother told me that some of the ladies in our tiny town, population 857, said to her in that sad Southern way that she was probably too old to be having a baby at the age of 42. "They told me you might not be right," she said. Might not be right was a way of saying that she might be giving birth to a watermelon, and she might need to check that thing to make sure there was something up there. My mother would tell me this story every so often and say, "And Larry, you were just as smart as anything, and I knew it the minute I saw those little beady black eyes staring back at me the day you were born." Thankfully, I was smarter than a watermelon, which was a good start in life, but there were some things lacking. For example, we had to get our milk from a cow, and we didn't have a television or a telephone. One day I found out a phone was an important thing to have. My mother was watching me play in a tree. I was hanging upside down by my legs from a limb when it broke. I came screaming down from way up there and landed on my head and knocked myself out. I was just laying there as limp as a dish rag, as they say in the South. And we had no phone to call the ambulance and no car because my dad drove the car to work, and we lived a mile outside of town on a farm. Of course, even if we had a phone, there was no 911 then anyway, and no ambulance in our town. Just a funeral home and a hearse, which it looked like she might need pretty soon. My mother took off running down the road on her long 47-year-old legs until she found a farmer in a field about half a mile away. And his John Deere tractor was the ambulance that day. He drove it to a neighbor's house even further down the road, and about half an hour later, when I should have been dead, my mother and I got to the hospital. The same doctor who delivered me declared that my watermelon head was okay. In spite of my fall from a tree, it was the happiest year of my life because I was 5 years old. And every morning, the school bus came and took my sisters away early in the morning. And my dad went to work, and it was just me and my mother. I was home because we had no kindergarten in our tiny hometown, no pre-K, no daycare. So my mother taught me how to read. Before the year was over, I could read the newspaper. She also taught me about life, love, and money that year. Money was important to me in those days as a 5-year-old. I always saved my money. I put my pennies in a little French's mustard jar with a slot in the jar lid where I dropped in the pennies. A penny was a big deal in those days because you could get more than one piece of candy with a penny. It was the time of year when the apricots were getting ripe. The same farmer whose John Deere tractor served as an ambulance came and plowed rows under the apricot trees for a garden. My mother and I planted black-eyed peas, beans, and corn, and I got to see how things that are planted come out of the ground. So one day I was out in the garden, 5 years old, looking up at those big golden apricots that were the same color as my pennies, shining up there on the branches. As I sat there all tiny and innocent, I realized that if I planted my pennies, because they looked just like the apricots to me, they would grow, and I could have all the pennies I wanted hanging from the branches. So I got my mustard jar and dug little holes and planted all my pennies and covered them up with dirt. Then I excitedly told my mother what I had done. She looked at me and said, "Oh, honey, those pennies won't grow." And that was the day I lost my innocence. I looked back at her with my big black eyes and I started to cry because all my money was gone. Everything I had in the world was buried in the ground under the apricot trees. But even though it was late in the day and the sun was starting to go down, my mother took me outside and got down on her hands and knees and started digging and telling me to help find the pennies. Maybe today a mother would just give me $1 or $2 and tell me, "It's okay, there's more here than the money you lost." But she didn't do that. My sisters came outside in their worldly big kid way and laughed at me for burying my money. They knew better. But my mother kept digging up those pennies with me till it got dark. She taught me that when you're wrong and when you have made a mistake and when you believe the wrong thing and when other people are laughing at you, that you still have a friend who will never laugh at you. That day I found out my mother was my best friend, and she stayed that way for another 50 years till she died at the age of 96. And all that wonderful lesson cost me was a few dirty pennies. Thank you.